Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Night School. Bob, how are you doing?
Good, ready to learn.
Yeah, and so Bob, since we last had our conversation, you've been running a little bit of Pathfinder 2, a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons.
I am a GM in training and a DM in training
There
for
you go.
sure.
There you go.
I've run one session of Dungeons and Dragons, I think, since, and two sessions of actually one more since our last video of Northern Reaches, which is our Pathfinder 2 mega multiplayer online Pathfinder 2 game.
Yeah, it's very, very cool, and you've gotten pretty good results as I understand it. The people
seem to like it.
They do.
I don't know if that's because I give out probably too much gold, but maybe they just like that. But I think they're liking the ideas that I'm putting down, especially the evolution of what my campaign adventure was. Session 1, the first one, which was just a tomb, single standalone. They could do that in one session, one sitting. And then my second one, which had a lot of story elements that were like starting to develop, and they're like, oh, there's some stuff going on here that we actually take lots of notes for to bring back to town to tell people about.
All right.
I think they really enjoyed that part, but that one was only like a single level, but a multi-adventure campaign. So really kind of jumped it up a notch.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it sounds like you might not need our tips anymore, Bob, but
I don't know, because I think there was some things I could learn from, especially on what we were talking about today, which is encounter design.
Well, there's a lot of different types of encounters, but the one that we're going to talk about today is combat encounters. And there's a lot of different kind of schools of thought when you think about a combat encounter, right? So there's this idea of sort of combat as war, right? And then combat as sport. Okay,
yes, I've heard those.
Cass and Caw. And so again, this is kind of combat as war, and this is combat as sport. And so, generally speaking, this is sort of associated with sort of the old school Renaissance, old school revival. And really you're talking about like, first edition, second edition, old school D&D, basic D&D, basic. Okay. Combat as a sport, and basically the idea of combat as war is the game mechanics aren't themselves interesting. But what is interesting is the fact that, like in real life, you can kind of do anything. You could, you're not really interested in counterbalance. If the group goes into a lair of 10 trolls, there's 10 trolls there. If the group fills 100 barrels with gunpowder and lures an army into a cavern and you blow up all the gunpowder, you kill all the enemies, right? Like combat as war is this idea that we're not really thinking about combat or encounters in a sort of balanced way. We're thinking about it in war, where the objective is to have as much unfair advantage as you could possibly have.
Is there also a little bit of like, there's not the most defined rules for combat as war?
Yeah, I mean,
is that not true?
No, I think that's true. Because you're gonna be doing a lot more things that are sort of outside of the rules purview, and you're gonna be relying a lot more on the GM to create a ruling, right? And a ruling is different than a house rule, and I should make a note of that. But because if you do something that's outside the purview of the game, you're going to have to basically make up a decision. What kind of dice, what kind of check are we going to have to do in order to do this? Now, the concept of combat as a sport is this idea that within the role-playing game, you start to think about encounters in terms of balance.
Mm-hmm.
And you start thinking about them in terms of them more like a game, right? Like a board game, right? And when you sit down to play somebody in, Battleship, or you sit down to play somebody in Risk, it's not like they show up, and they have, they have 26 ships and you only have 3, right? No, you both start with the same number of battleships, because it's interested in being a balanced and fair game.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea then becomes, it's more about playing the game and playing the game well to sort of gain an advantage over your opponent and sort of beat them. And one of the hallmarks of combat as a sport is sort of, robust mechanics surrounding combat. That means there's a lot of rules about what X does, what Y does, what can you do on your turn, How many actions can you take? How far can you move? How much XP do you have? What is considered fair? What is considered unfair? What should you put into your, dungeon? What shouldn't you put into your dungeon? And if that sounds familiar, that's because that's what Pathfinder 2 is.
Yeah.
Right.
And it does it really well.
Yes. And they actually have done a good job of getting that math, pretty well and truly taken care of. So, we understand now what is the nature of our situation here. We've got a combat as sport game. And so that means we need to think about these fights.
Well, is D&D
differently.
also combat as sport? That's the other big person. That's the other big TTRPG in the room.
There's 8 editions of Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, so 5e, the one that's the most current.
So 5e, I would say it's less than Pathfinder 2. Because there's not as many rules.
Okay.
The 5th edition, I mean, it's one of those, it's kind of a catch-22, right? Not having a rule for something is sort of like saying, there's 2 ways to view it. It's either saying, well, you can't do that thing, or it's saying you can do that thing, but the GM is going to have to make a ruling on the spot about how that action gets, interpreted.
Yeah.
But paradoxically, it does not work the other way. When you have more rules that define things, now when that situation comes up, now the GM if the GM wants to do something different, they technically still can, because the GM can do whatever they want, theoretically. But that is no longer a ruling. That is a house rule.
Yeah.
And that's different. Those are different concepts. And we won't get into that today, but that's more of a live stream thing. But so one of the key takeaways, though, is in Pathfinder 2, you should be thinking of your combat encounters like a game. I don't want to say a video game or board game. I mean, you could certainly create.
What's wrong with those?
Well, nothing, but they do have a bad reputation within the TTRPG space.
No, I get it,
and maybe not maybe not unfairly, but I definitely think it's a situation where it's a case where there's going to be a lot. If you have a very combat focused game, which is most people's games, if you're playing APs, and when I say combat focused, I don't mean 90%, but I mean, if your game is even 50+% combat, that's pretty combat focused. The players have a lot of abilities. They get a feat every other level. A lot of people are using free archetype. So you're essentially getting 1 class feat per level. They might have up to 12 or 13 magical items. Between stuff that they can hold, the stuff that they invest, they are going to have up to 7 general feats, up to 7 ancestry feats, 10 skill feats. There's something like 19 or 20 skills in the games, a lot of which have combat applications. And when you kind of add that all up, the players have a lot of tools at their disposal to usually, most of those things that we just described, tend to do things in combat. And so if your game is just stride, strike, 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 stride, strike, 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 you're not really taking full advantage of what a combat encounter could be in Pathfinder 2. Now, this doesn't mean you have to do it this way, but it's my belief that people should play into a system strength. And I think Pathfinder 2, like, another way to think of it is this. You could play Dungeons and Dragons with no grid, right?
Yeah.
And everything is theater of the mind, right? And you're moving around. But in Pathfinder 2, you have items and feats that give you things like plus 5 feet of movement, plus 10 feet of movement, and your character and armor, which if you're wearing heavier armor, you get a -5 speed, technically a -10 speed penalty. But if you're strong enough, it's only a -5 speed penalty. And your base speed is 25 feet. So now it's down to 20 feet, and then it's up to 30 feet. Well, that either matters or it doesn't.
Well, doesn't they have speed in D&D too?
They do,
or as well.
Again, there's 8 or 9 editions of the game, so you do have to be more specific.
5e is what I'll be describing, unless I'd say something differently.
That's correct. But consider the following: in a game like 5th edition, they don't even have flanking.
Not in the base game, yeah.
I mean, they don't have flanking in 5th edition. Full stop.
There's some weird optional rule that you can do.
There's always an optional rule there's also probably an optional rule that players can fly at first level. But I'm talking about the actual game. So my point is, but I'll actually to your point, if a group were to use the flanking optional rule in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, my guess would be they would want to start playing on a miniature grid or a grid.
They would want to know where they are located on the map.
Yeah, because suddenly if I'm here versus here, that makes a big difference, right? Whereas before it didn't matter.
I mean, I agree, but also I have flanked in Theater of the Mind, so you could say I'm going to move up behind him and get his flank. I do agree though that PF2 is so strategic in the combat that it almost has to be done on the grid or a map, just because you sort of have to be able to play it that way. You have to be able to move those incremental distances and how the strategy is lining up and where things are exactly a little more, I would say a lot more specific than say D&D 5e. So
yes, but also, I mean, again, consider that the game of Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition is designed to support a non-tactical gridless play.
Oh, I agree.
Pathfinder 2 is not.
Yeah.
Because in Pathfinder 2, a lot of your ability things tie specifically to how far away you are. Which is a long and short way of saying you should make your combats in Pathfinder 2 interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's a couple different ways you could do that. But
this is where I need to pay attention. How to make them interesting.
Yeah, but what it really comes down to is and we'll kind of cover all three of these as quickly as we possibly can. There are sort of three components to a fight or to a combat encounter. The first is the foes.
Mm-hmm.
The second is the terrain.
Okay.
And the third is the objective.
Does environment also land in terrain?
Sure.
Okay. I just didn't know if it was separate.
I don't know what else it would be if it's not terrain. So,
well, I'm thinking more like it's raining.
Sure. Okay. Fine.
Yeah.
Terrain / environment.
Yep.
So these are the three things that could, and if you want to be successful, must vary from every fight to fight.
What do you mean? Like some are stronger than the others?
No, meaning each of these things should be different in almost every single fight. Otherwise, your game will become very stale and repetitive.
Okay, keep going while I'm thinking.
No. I mean, this is.
I was trying to think like, I had a fight where I was sort of putting goblins in an area.
Yep.
As sort of a low encounter to stepping into the dungeon cave system. There wasn't a big deal with these goblins. They certainly have sort of started to take over this area. There wasn't a huge objective with them.
Yep.
So I had the foes.
Yeah.
There was the terrain because they were in this cave system that was dark. They had to be able to see.
Yeah.
But the objective was kind of like, they can just kill these guys or not kill these guys.
Well,
really, there was no greater purpose of them other than sort of establishing there's some goblins there, I guess. I don't know.
Well, okay, so you're conflating two different things.
Okay.
So
that's why I'm confused.
Yeah. So you are conflating the game objective with the combat's objective.
Oh, okay. Now, okay. Yep.
So, for a lot of people out there, 99% of the time, this is kill all your foes. Okay. That's what it is. Now, I'm not saying that's bad, but that is bad. Because it's boring. Quite frankly, it gets very repetitive and gets really bored. And if it feels sometimes like you're trapped into only doing this, you would also be correct. Because most games don't really support anything else anymore. And so this is actually the hardest one to deal with. Okay. But if you can figure out a way to change this, you will create, legendary things. Because we talked about, these are the three levers that we can pull, right? So what are our objectives? What are the objective of a combat, right? Well, it's simple, right? We want to challenge the players.
Mm-hmm.
We want to challenge the PCs, right?
Yep. Yeah, players as in the person playing.
Right. We want to challenge Bob.
Yep.
Okay, but we also want to challenge Bob's character.
Yep.
And that means so Bob should be having to make decisions. And remember, for a decision to make a difference, that means you need to, one, be aware that you are making a decision. Two, you understand what are the potential risks or rewards, the costs, the benefits of that decision. And three, when you make that decision, if it's a good decision, it should result in good things for you. And if you make a bad decision, it should result in bad things for you, right? The decision should matter. You know, if I go, so I'll give it to kind of give it an illustration here. We'll take a very simplistic fight. Let's say there's a fight in a room, okay? And the party is entering from here, and there is a zombie and a zombie and a zombie and a zombie. Okay?
Very symmetrical.
It looks like one of your encounters, I'm sure.
Well, it was fantastic.
So right off the bat, we have removed any ability for the player to make a decision. Right? Because what am I going to do? Are you going to fight the zombie or are you going to fight the zombie? Maybe you'll go fight the zombie. Right? There's no texture to this combat. This combat is just four things that are the same in an otherwise empty room. So what is this combat doing? This combat is strictly challenging the PC. Right? Can your characters do enough damage to these four zombies before they die? And so what the combat will feel like, maybe not at first, when you're playing with new people or whatever, but you've been playing for a while. You've been playing in my games. You've been playing Smith's game. If a combat challenges the PCs, what it will start to feel like is like you're just rolling dice.
Yeah, it'll seem like a video game at that board game or something like that. At that point.
But not even, right? Because unless it's a bad video game or a bad, because those
are the games I play, the ones that I don't have to think too much.
Maybe it'll start to feel like like a Diablo on easy mode.
I was thinking like what's that old Destiny Warriors, whatever it was.
Dynasty Warriors.
I just spam A and just swing in a circle.
Right. Everybody
there's sort of a goal.
Yeah. So but I mean, it's like, okay, after you killed the 700th guy, aren't you just kind of bored? You're like, no.
No, I'll keep going.
Right. And again, props to you. Like if you have a group of players who are just very satisfied with just repeating and rinsing and repeating, and then, more props to you. But this combat here where we have sort of four zombies is already very bad because it doesn't challenge the players. Okay. It only challenges the PCs. So our objective is to challenge the players, challenge the PCs, and I'm going to make it really confusing by putting it right here just so I can use my screen real estate. The third objective is for it to be fun and memorable. All right. You could easily have an encounter which is challenging, but isn't necessarily fun or particularly memorable. And let me give you a great example. Just real quick. I'll sauce this up. Okay.
Oh yeah.
You ready? Okay.
Sauce it
up. Here we go. This is the example of how I can change these three things. Again, we don't know the relative size of these, right? So we're just going with this. Okay. So this is a zombie. This is a zombie. And this is a zombie. Okay. Now let's change this into some sort of necromancer or lich, right? Some sort of caster.
Okay, that's dynamic.
Okay. Now, the party probably wants to get to this guy. They probably want to go kill him, right? Because he's a tough fight. He's the caster. He's powerful. But if all the strong barbarians and fighters run over to fight this lich, then these zombies are going to come in and munch on all the, clerics and wizards and sorcerers. You may remember from our Rise of the Rune Lords campaign where
this has happened
to you, where you and the other frontline combatants rushed off to go fight the sort of the evil cleric wizard guy, and your party, your casters, your wizard and your sorcerer got set upon by a gang of lesser people. Okay. So right off the bat, you have these zombies who want to come and eat, everybody, but maybe the zombies aren't too much of a threat to, the big fighter, but they are a threat to the rogue or the wizard or the cleric. Meanwhile, the lich is standing back, but now we'll add an extra, sort of dynamic to it. Let's say that there is a bubbling pit of acid in this room. Okay. Now, suddenly you, the fighter, make a decision. You say, I am going to go for the Lich. You guys stay back on defense. You guys got this. Someone has to take out that Lich. We can't just sit here and fight these zombie, which are clearly just like throwaway minions.
This cannon fodder.
While this guy's sitting here casting evil spells on us. But now you have to make another decision, which will also test your PC. Do you take the long way around? Maybe it'll take you a whole extra turn to go around the pit of acid. Or do you try to jump that?
Yeah.
Right. And if you roll,
so then you start thinking, what's my athletics?
But then most importantly, right, you're rewarding the player. Hey, I took quick jump, or I have some sort of feat that makes me a better jumper than someone else in the party. Or maybe I don't have to go. Maybe I don't have a good athletics, but I have invested so much into my speed, or I took a feat like sudden charge. I'm going to be able to move, and still attack. So I'm going to be able to get to the Lich in one round and still be able to make an attack this round. So by adding these kind of extra elements, now we add the fun and memorable part. What if these zombies, we've established before, what did you call them? Cannon
fodder? Yeah.
Okay, what if we give them ability when they come in, they grab people, right? And then the Lich has the zombies drag the person, including the zombie, and hurl them into the pit of acid. Like the zombie just sacrifice.
Suicide bomb.
Yeah, like a suicide. The zombie just grabs people, starts dragging them towards the acid, and then the zombie, in a full bear hug, just plummets over the edge to sort of just dissolve him and his victim in the acid. So suddenly this fight's crazy because people are being dragged, screaming across the ground towards the pit of acid. The fighter has to leap back across the acid pit, kill the zombie before the helpless halfling cleric gets dragged into the acid pit. The Lich cackles maniacally and sends another wave of fire. Suddenly this fight is a whole hell of a lot more dynamic and, more importantly, really fun and memorable. Hey, remember that time we fought that one guy in that one campaign that one time? No. Do you remember that fight with the zombies in the acid pit? Yeah, I don't even remember our characters' names. That was 10 years ago. But I remember that fight, and I remember it was awesome. And I remember it's, you get into this zone, which I'm like with a lot of my closest and oldest friends, where it's like, no, I don't even remember your character's name. All I know in my mind is that not my character, me, I was getting dragged into the acid pit, and you, Bob, saved me. Not your character, it's you. And it's like and like the way your mind works, the way your memory works, my brain thinks like, yeah, it's like Bob and I have been through hell and back. He did save me that time. I know I can rely on him. And you're like, wait, no, he didn't do anything. He just made an athletics check and then a striking roll. But your brain really does remember these things. And this is why I like role-playing games so much. But my point is that by using a variety of foes, some interesting terrain or environment, and by having asymmetrical objectives, you've created a much more interesting combat.
Is that just pushing and pulling on like the dynamic of the combat as well? Like for zombies, there's no dynamic there.
Oh, 100%. Now, that's like baseline.
I'm pushing and pulling different creatures. We talked about like the rule of 3 last time.
Right.
But like now I'm putting an environment, but also like you said about turning it memorable, that's another dynamical shift tone. It's almost a tonal shift of what was happening. Not just they're attacking me,
right.
Which is it's like a one-on-one fight, but now I might have to go save somebody that's being dragged. That's a whole nother tonal shift.
Right. Exactly. Now, I mean, when I say about objectives, right, because there's a couple of things here. Number one, you could make something else where you could say, hey, listen, when the Lich dies, all the other creatures die. They were bound to his will.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And maybe someone figures that out in the middle of the combat. Maybe they with a recall knowledge, or maybe there's something
that cut off the head and
right. So now suddenly the fight is like, okay, yeah, we should totally focus on the Lich, because fighting these zombies is sort of a waste of our time. But getting to the Lich is difficult, and we can't just ignore the zombies, because they're trying to pull people into the acid, or they're doing some other kind of crazy nonsense, or we're just going to let them eat up our wizards and our sorcerers and our clerics. So the objective suddenly changes, but also like I said, asymmetrical objectives. The zombies aren't trying to reduce you to 0 hit points. Their objective is to grab you and pull you using like some sort of weird forced movement and pull you into this acid pit. And suddenly they're not operating on the same basis that maybe you're used to, because now the fight isn't about getting to 0 hit points. It's about not getting dragged over the edge. and it becomes a much more like suddenly you're thinking of things and you're looking at your sheet, you're looking inside your
Yeah,
brain.
you're like, how can I escape this grapple
What
versus attacking them? It's like,
exactly.
can I?
Exactly. And I think you just get more bang for your buck because, well, quite frankly, these fights they already take a while to get through. But if you make them interesting and memorable, then at least you get something cool out of it.
I had a D&D fight just recently lasted 2 hours, and I don't even know if I remember everything about it.
Now, did it? But did it take 2 hours because it was really now? Because here's the thing.
It was just there was a lot of characters to manage,
Yeah,
a
I
lot of
do.
monsters.
I do want to sort of make sure that I stress this, that this is complex. It's not necessarily complicated, right? Does that make sense?
Yes,
Like, it's not like you need to have some sort of crazy elaborate, oh, I generated a whole new subsystem just to be able to have this fight. You know,
you were talking about creating one action that's different.
well, yeah, not even. That might just be something that zombie has.
Mhm.
It's called like a zombie kazi or something. And like
That's a pretty good name. Sounds like a drink.
right. And you just give it this ability where if it can land a grab on its turn, it can like move half its speed and you get pulled along with it or something like that, right? And then
Yep.
it tries to fling you and it over the edge. And that's how, in my opinion, you make combats more interesting, is by sort of taking foes, terrain, objective. Now, of course, in Pathfinder 2, we want these things to be balanced. And this is kind of where we talked about this in a previous episode. So I'm going to clear this if you're all right with that.
Oh yeah.
Hopefully you folks at home are okay with that being cleared.
If not, pause the video and then take your notes really quick.
Yeah. So if you remember what we talked about maybe 1 or 2 episodes ago, I talked about the idea that you should have encounters, okay, in my opinion, when we were talking about the numerical side of it, severes, moderates, low. Okay.
It's called low.
Okay, got it. So it's like, why low, moderate, severe? Why isn't it called low, moderate, high? Anyways, bad editing. So we talked about the need that I personally felt like a good majority of your fights. By the way, not variety is the spice of life. Sometimes it is fine, right? If to have a fight that is just 4 zombies in a room. And you know what it'll feel like? Ah, cool. We brains turned off, right? Like this is just we come in there, there's 4 zombies, we kill them and we move on, right? That can be a nice change of pace. You don't always have to make everything to be this kind of like, Sudoku word jumble of a fight.
I was wondering about that because people were wondering, like, why were these goblins here? They were so easy to kill. There wasn't really any story to them.
Well, that is
my point was just because they established themselves in the area.
Yeah.
But there wasn't more puzzle to it.
and this is sort of a contentious point, right? And not to get off on a tangent, but if you're a fan of this channel, I talk about GNS theory a lot. And goblins live here, and this fight wasn't that hard, but that's because there was only a couple of goblins here. That is a very simulationist mindset. These goblins are here. They're not here to be a balanced encounter. They're not here to be a challenging encounter specifically designed for your party members. They're just here, and you got to kill them, right? So that's a very simulationist mindset. A gamist mindset is thinking like, shouldn't all these fights be an appropriate level challenge, and shouldn't they all like be something that really stresses our characters out and causes us to have to really be tough. But like what I was saying before though is that some percentage, I think I might have said 50%. I felt like 50% of your fights should be what I called severe, but I can't exactly remember what I called them. Challenging if might have been the other thing that I called them. Challenging if. And the idea here is that you have a tough fight, but that if the party can approach it the correct way, suddenly the fight really feels more like a moderate, right? Or something that isn't as difficult. So for example, let's say you go into a room and there's these zombies, and there's this necromancer, and there's this pool of acid, right? That might be a challenging fight. But if the party very quickly realizes, hey, let's ignore the zombies, we'll go straight for the lich, we'll stay away from the zombies so none of us get grabbed because they might pull us into the acid. Suddenly that fight, and then when we kill the lich, the zombies will die. So we don't even have to fight them. Suddenly you're like, yep, that fight felt like it was real easy.
Yeah.
Because it was, because you made good decisions and you were rewarded for those good decisions. So a lot of times this kind of design methodology basically says, if the party can figure out how to beat this encounter in a good way, it will resolve much quickly and much more easily in their favor. If they can't, then it will be, hard on them mechanically, as they have to sort of fight and slog their way through all of these different, creatures and stuff like that. So to that end, let's talk about foes. Now, should come as no surprise, but to be clear, Pathfinder 2 does have these. One of the biggest failings of Pathfinder 2, in my opinion, is that, and this is a failing of 5th edition as well. 4th edition D&D, 13th Age does this as well, introduced this idea of a monster having a role. Okay? Something that as the GM, without ever even reading the monster's description, you understand what this creature's job is in a combat encounter. Now, as a role-playing perspective, it's a living, breathing creature, but in the context of the game, it has certain key abilities that allow it to fulfill a role. And if this sounds familiar, it's because, that's what character classes do, right? If we are playing Pathfinder 2, Bob, my cleric, they're not there to do damage. They're
there to heal.
They're there to heal, right? In our Knights of Last Call game, Rise of the Ruler game, Escanor was not there to do damage. He was there to protect.
Yep.
Right. So we understand that we have these clear delineations of roles and responsibilities. Well, monsters should have these too. And 4th edition D&D did a really good job of this. And actually, Pathfinder kind of sort of has this. If you look in the monster creation guidelines, as well as on pf2.tools, you will see that they have these sort of statistical breakdowns for different categories of monster. Okay.
Things in the GMG.
I think it is in the GMG. But the Pathfinder 2 game talks about things like brutes, magical strikers, spellcasters, etc., as different kind of categories of monsters that have different varying abilities and varying traits. But I'm a softie, and I love 4th edition's roles. Okay. And before we get into the roles, though, we should talk about what can a monster do in a fight, right? And in my opinion, they can only do 3 things. Okay. They can do damage.
Mm-hmm.
They can control, which means they make your life harder, right? They make the party's life harder. And they can support
each other,
right?
Mm-hmm.
So another way to think about control is don't think of it exactly like this, but think of it as debuffing,
mm-hmm.
and think about support as buffing, right? Yep. And that's kind of it, right? A fight becomes a lot more interesting when there are not just different creatures, but creatures with different roles.
Yeah, I was thinking like a scout, someone that comes up, checks out what's going on, reports back to the monsters.
Well, but that is still very simulationist. I'm talking about inside of a combat.
You're talking about the monster itself.
Yes, I'm talking about what does this monster's abilities do? Because that's where Pathfinder 2, I think, misses the mark a little bit, which is there are obviously ways when you're building a monster or when you're looking at a monster that you can adjust its statistics to support this concept. But it's not just about the stats. It's also about the abilities that monster has. Are you giving it the tools that it needs in order to fulfill its role? It also is very important because as a GM, This makes this a whole hell of a lot easier, okay, just to run the monster.
Yeah.
Now,
Like, what do
unfortunately,
I need in this fight?
right.
This, and this.
Well, but it's like a shortcut. It's like a hand of instructions, right? Like, what does this character, what does this monster do? Now, unfortunately, we don't have that. Now, maybe someday the Knights of Last Call will go through every single monster and sort of assign them a category. But right now, what I would encourage you to do, unfortunately, is read through a monster's description. And if I'll make another criticism, unfortunately, some monsters, in my opinion, are all over the place, right? They read like,
Is it trying to do too many things?
yeah, they're just trying to do too many things. And it's like a, it's like a sorcerer with a really high strength with the Dragon Claw spell, and has gauntlets or hand wraps of mighty blows. But
Man,
then
it sounds like you're talking about my character.
I am, but yet cast magic missile all the time and took dangerous sorcery. It's like, well, which is it? Because here's the thing. You know what to do. You've been playing this character for many, many, many months now. But if I sat down and played your character, would I be like, is this thing supposed to go into melee? Am I ranged, stay back, cast magic missiles and fireball? What am I doing with this character? It has so many abilities and they are all over the place.
Yeah, it's almost like complex for no reason.
Kind of. I mean, I'm not trying to like belittle that. I think that in a character, versatility could be very powerful because unlike a monster, I mean, unless you're one of these very special, rare few people, fact of the matter is most of the time monsters have a life expectancy of exactly about 5 rounds, right? And you're never going to see them again. Oh, it's the NPC, the villain of the entire, yeah, okay, less than 10 rounds, they're dead, right? And you're never going to see them again. A monster doesn't have to be versatile because a monster is only going to be played and in that one fight. Right. So you don't have to worry about that. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So PCs could be versatile, but, monsters, not so much. I prefer
I was thinking like you're running this thing for 3 to 5 rounds.
Right.
Why is it overly complex? It has a purpose.
Sure.
And what is that purpose? And let's do that purpose really well. And then that's it.
Right. And I'm a bigger fan of that because I think it's easier for the GM to play and
it's easy for the PC to figure out.
You got it. Exactly. The PCs could quickly understand, oh, I get it. This is this kind of monster. I'm not going to, and it avoids those gotchas that I always talk about where, you're fighting this creature and then suddenly it pulls out this ability. You're like, what? Why the hell does that creature have that ability? It doesn't even make sense. No, I mean, there's room for little, fun little, changes or whatever. But for the most part, I think that you're best.
It shouldn't be the norm. It should be something special.
Correct. So, and, so we talked about sort of damage, control, and support. Those are kind of like the 3, the triangle of what does this, what is this creature, what's its job, right? And then there's sort of the, sort of of another, I guess I would say, triangle, which is how does it achieve its superiority? Right? Like, what is its advantage? What does it have? Okay. That gives it something special. Okay. So what do I mean by that? So let's take a look at damage. Okay. In my mind, there are kind of three ways that you can sort of do damage, right? And have an advantage. Okay. The first is to use a ranged attack, right?
Okay.
If I have a bow or I shoot fire from afar away, well, most people don't have bows or shoot arrows, right? A lot of spells.
You're talking about on the monster side right now?
Yep.
Okay. Yep.
Okay. So this gives the monster a sort of an advantage, right? It also lets you understand, oh, I get what this monster is trying to do. Right? It's trying to stay away and shoot people. The other advantage, the other way that a creature could have an advantage on damage is by just doing what I would claim, to say is just doing a lot of it. Okay. And this could be everything from a big hulking creature that just smashes people to something more like an assassin or a rogue, right? Where the damage is whatever. But if you're flat footed, right, they're going to light you up. They're going to light you up, right? And then the third way is what I would describe as AoE, where maybe the damage itself isn't that high, but because it's doing to many people, right? It's like, oh yeah, that damage only did 25. Okay, but it hit 5 people. That's 125 damage, right? That's a ton. So those are sort of like the 3 ways, in my opinion, that a creature can be threatening with damage. By the way, if a creature isn't there to do damage, it doesn't need these 3 things.
It does make sense.
Okay.
I was wondering, would you like do things like flying and invisibility all in that? Like,
No.
Okay, that's not even in this. It's not even, that's not, because that's not really the type of damage.
Yeah, no, we're not.
Okay.
We're not talking about there.
Okay, we're not there
Okay.
yet.
So
It was in my head though.
no, that's fine. All right. So we get to control, debuffing. In my mind, there are sort of 2 main ways that a creature can sort of do this, kind of can control things, right? The first is by literally, I put it in, parentheses, but literally by debuffing,
Mhm.
right? Casting slow on the party, casting a spell that immobilizes them. They can't move around, casting a spell that paralyzes them or frightens them, right? You're literally debuffing them. But what you're really doing is you're limiting what they can do. You're making it more difficult for the party to achieve their objective, right? The other way that you could control the party is, and for lack of a better word, is attack of opportunity, right? So
What about physical control? Physical control, like grabbing or mind control, things like that.
so I called it attack of opportunity, but that's sort of kind of where I was going with this.
Okay.
What I would say is like literally physical control,
Got
right?
it.
So, you know what? Maybe that's a better way to describe it, is physical control. Okay. So for example, the tentacle monster comes in and it grabs 2 people, right? That monster might not even be doing that much damage. Okay. Suddenly imagine a fight. Okay.
It's a pain in the butt.
Okay. Imagine a fight. You enter into this ancient temple. The walls are slick with slime and water. There's sewer grates sort of pouring into everywhere. And in the center of this room, running down the length of it, is some sort of like ancient channel or canal, which is filled with a brackish water. And then as you enter at the far end of this room, maybe 100 feet away, 120 feet away, right? Far outside the range of most casters' spells, maybe take 2, maybe even 3 turns for a melee character to cross that distance. Suddenly you see 2 of the horrible Kuatoa, which are like evil frog people. I know you're not super versed in D&D lore.
I am not.
Okay. So you see 2 Kuatoa, okay, at the far end. Now, already, and remember that 120 feet of distance along the banks of this brackish dark canal, the stones are slick, covered in slime and muck.
There's your environment.
What do you think might happen if you move across that?
I would think you have to make a balance check or an acrobatics check.
I think you would have to as well. So that 120 feet might actually be 120 feet as the crow flies, but it might be a lot more challenging, right?
Mhm.
Now, you got at the far end of this chamber, though, the 2 evil frog people, the Kuatoa, are there standing there. What are you gonna do? You're gonna make them meleeers?
Fireball.
Right. They have, they summon bolts of electricity, or they have, ancient bows, or they're throwing spells, right?
Yep.
Because, again, one, you could argue simulationist wise, these creatures live here. Why would they stand at the far end? They're like, yeah, I've got a big great axe. Now I got to close the 120 feet of fucking distance. No,
Yep.
like they are going to take advantage of the space. You are entering into their domain.
It's a little bit of combat as war.
It is. So there's a combat of war there, but the real thing is the combat of sport aspect. I'm
Correct.
trying to create a situation where I want to create a challenge to my players and to my PCs.
Yep.
That's 2 monsters, right? Now that's clearly our damage component, right? Damage, ranged, right?
Yep.
Heck, maybe it's 2. Maybe it's ranged and it's AoE.
Yes. Yeah.
Or maybe it's single target. It's ranged and it's a lot, right? Like these crackling dark bolts. Maybe they're dark priests. Okay. But how would we spice this fight up? Now, remember, because again, what you want to do is imagine a scenario. Okay. We'll draw it out here, Bob. Okay. We've got our long room. Okay. This direction indicates where the PCs are coming from. Okay. You've got your Kuatoa whips here. Okay. And they are blasting.
Yeah.
And then we said we have this kind of long canal that runs down the length of the room and, splatterings of gunk and debris all over the place. Now, naturally, what is if you think about it objectively, think about it as a third party. What are the PCs going to do?
Cast Fireball.
Okay. How many PCs have Fireball?
And just probably the sorcerer with our arcane or the wizard.
So the other three characters are just going to
actually, you know what? Everyone has it because it's Fireball necklace.
Okay. Well, good news is these creatures are outside the range of the Fireball necklace.
Oh, that's a good point. I would think the characters that have the best acrobatics could move forward, but the rest of them might take out their ranged weapons and try to shoot if they can.
Right. And now for a fact that in Pathfinder 2, unless you are an 18 dex master class weapon, you might as well not shoot your bow.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So
you're doing nothing.
Right. So shooting your bow is nothing. So if this party consisted of a barbarian with a great axe, a swashbuckler with a rapier, right, some sort of wizard or sorcerer who had some spells, okay, and then some sort of, cleric, odds are pretty good that the barbarian and the sorcerer, the barbarian and the swashbuckler,
they're charging in.
They're going to try to close in, right?
Yep.
Now, so we know what the party's going to do. So what do? We counter it. Well, we're not done yet. We haven't spent all this fight's XP, and we need something that isn't just damage. So what do we add? Control. So what do you think is waiting in this canal? You guessed it. Big, scary tentacle monster. Okay.
Oh, that's where you're going with it.
Now, what does this creature do? It grabs people. Right? It's not even there to do damage. I mean, of course,
it's almost like a hazard.
Yeah, but you could do this as a hazard, by the way. That's what one of the strengths of Pathfinder 2 is. You could totally do this as a hazard. And we'll talk about that, actually. That kind of gets to that third point, which was the objective point.
I love hazards.
Okay. but we're keeping it a little bit simpler here. But you put in this big, now granted, it's Pathfinder 2, so this creature will still have some baseline damage, but that's not its thing, right? Are you familiar with the GMG creature creation rules?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but I read through them.
Okay. Well, so when you build a monster, right, for each level, they give you damage expressions basically for like low, average, high, and extreme, right? For how much damage it does. So a creature like this might just do low damage, right? Just, it's like, oh, it's something. But you're like, you're like, oh, that's
more annoying than it is anything.
Well, it's not just annoying. Now suddenly these characters are grabbed. That means they are sitting ducks. That means they are flat-footed. That means that they are going to just be lit up by these powerful Kuatoa whips, these kind of artillery that are sitting here raining down. Or, as a GM, you get the barbarian grabbed, you get the swashbuckler grabbed, and they go, cool, we don't have to deal with them. We'll just focus fire down on the wizard and the cleric.
Yeah, then you're in real trouble.
And you guys were counting on the barbarian and the swashbuckler closing the distance and, ending these
and doing
creatures.
Probably the good damage.
Doing the good damage. And now you're kind of removed from the encounter, and my two artillery, back here, my howitzers, right, can just rain down on your sort of softer targets with impunity. While the big scary creature, now you might say, okay, well, we're going to have to kill this thing, right? So the swashbuckler starts killing this thing and the barbarian starts killing this thing. Good.
It's wasted turns.
You have to, I guess,
actions.
You have to deal with it, but that's fine. That thing's not what's doing the damage. That thing isn't what's going to kill you, right? That's just what's keeping you controlled.
But that was you're talking about the decisions. Now I'm testing the PC's decision making, what they want to
Yeah.
do, as well as the PC's skill to be able to do those things.
Exactly. So it's like a two-step process. Step one is the player has to make a strategy or a tactic. And then the second step is, okay, but then in Pathfinder 2, there's usually some sort of die roll or check or attack roll. And then we get to test the mechanics of it. Did you do you have the right feats and do you have the right abilities? Did you cast the right buff spells? Did you aid? Did you do everything you can to give yourself the highest chance of actually succeeding at that situation? And of course, here's the thing, no matter how much of a good GM you are, you get to a point where you if I'm designing this encounter, I go, all right, so these two creatures are lighting them up. If the party holds back, great. I know that they don't have strong ranged combat. Most parties tend to be pretty melee focused. I mean, you've seen that, right? In every single party you've been a part of, right?
Yep.
The people who do have ranged attacks, they tend to be 30 foot, 60 foot range, right? Fireball probably breaks that paradigm, to be clear.
That's every time you're asking a question, I'm like fireball, because I know it does. Something
right.
like 500 feet.
And you want to hear, I mean, you could do it this way. Guess how wide this chamber is?
I don't know, 30 feet.
That's great. I'm sorry, not 30 feet. You make it 50 feet.
Okay.
Do you know why?
Because a thing is only 30 feet. Sorry, you lost your screen, Derek.
No.
Okay.
You lost the screen.
I lost the screen. 50 feet because the normal range of a spell is 30 feet.
No.
And normal movement's 30 feet.
No.
Okay.
I said
tell me why.
I said the width.
Yeah. So I guess I'm confused why it would be 50 feet then.
Because the diameter of a fireball is 40 feet. So you couldn't hit both.
Yeah, because 20-foot burst, right?
Yep, 20-foot burst. So if they cast a fireball in the middle, it'll hit neither.
That's a good idea. That's a good thing.
And then so we'll get it.
I can already see like the player going, "Son of a bee, I can't hit them both."
Right, but here's
what do we do?
But here's the key: you're not cheating as a GM. You're not fudging, right? You are, part of the nature of this.
I think you created a challenging
exactly
thing there.
Right, exactly. But here's the thing: eventually, you get to a point where you go, okay, so if they just step back and they try to trade with these creatures, well, only one person in the party, maybe the wizard, maybe like the ranger with a bow, is even capable of really dealing damage at this range. Okay, so I have the advantage. So my weakness, though, because here's the other thing: you got to give the players due. You cannot create super characters. Okay, you cannot create super monsters. All right, you have to avoid that at all costs. Okay. We created
like basically immune to everything.
Well, not just immune to everything, but if we created these guys as these sort of frail lizard frog people who can rain down these ungodly powerful bolts of electricity, okay?
Don't give them 500 HP.
Don't give them 500 HP. Give them low AC, low hit points. Make them glass cannons. If the party can figure out a way, because that is the correct strategy. The strategy is get to those two creatures and take them out. If you could do that, right? Like, and as this is where Pathfinder 2 and D&D and stuff can become really fun because, you're sitting here going, ha ha ha, and then the first round, like the Magus dimension doors next to one of these things, and then you're like, oh shit. And then he just like drops a huge spell strike on it and you go, well played, well played. Yeah. Look, I'm not trying to TPK you, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's impossible for me to truly understand the outcomes. I can assume certain likelihood, scenarios. What makes the game fun is when someone busts out some ability or some magical item or some crazy thing and you go, oh man, that's perfect. And
it sounds like shenanigans a little bit.
It does sound a little bit like shenanigans, but
listen to our last podcast.
But most importantly,
you want to hear about that.
Yeah. If I'm setting up this fight, when I was first setting up this fight, you at home might be thinking, okay, so let me get this straight, Derek. You created this encounter. It's a long chamber to neutralize the party's ability to move in range. The ground is difficult to move through, requiring checks. These creatures deal a lot of damage, but they go down really quickly, but it's hard to get to them. And then when you do try to get to them, another creature pulls out that's really good at grabbing and immobilizing you. That's correct. This fight is hard. But if for whatever reason in the first round, the Magus dimension doors across the room and then kills one of them, and the party has some other way and they kill the other creature, you go, oh, I guess that fight was actually really easy.
Yeah. Severe but.
It's a severe
challenging if.
Challenging if. severe butt. Now here's the fun part for me as a GM, getting back to the why we GM. I get to a certain point, you play some back and forth, and eventually you get to a point where you kind of go, let's say, ignore the dimension door thing for a moment, but you're like, okay, these two creatures are in the back. They're raining down their dark energy, electrical bolts. The ground is difficult. They move forward. The creature comes out. It's emerging them. If they fight it, I'm blasting them. If they don't fight it, then they're not going anywhere. And then you're like, I don't know how they could possibly win. And then when you sit
up to you though,
and that's right, I don't know what's going to happen. And then when I sit down and play, and the polarity comes up with some crazy thing that I never expected, I get to go, holy shit, guys, that was awesome. I didn't see that. And
if you made it a super monster, it's almost like to the PCs, you feel like you've been cheated. Like, how was I supposed to even do anything?
Well, it's also about decisions making a difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a creature needs that sort of Achilles heel. And when I say Achilles heel, that's not even a fair assessment, because Achilles heel is the idea of like this one very specific thing. I mean, like weakness isn't even the right term. A creature just needs to have an ability where it's like, okay, my decisions matter, and it should be obvious what it is. If it's like, oh, you had to use sonic damage, you're kind of like, oh, how would we have ever known that?
Yeah, that seems like a gotcha.
It is like it's like a anti-gotcha. Right? Yeah. It's some weird thing, but it's very apparent what the situation is here. And the party is going to pull out some crazy, weird array of abilities, and they're going to astound you with what they do. And they might start thinking a little bit outside the box, and you might have to make a couple rulings. And what's most important is you're going to challenge the players, because they actually have to think, what are we going to do? You're going to
does it make it less challenging if, like you were talking about these roles? Like when I see them, I go, I know this is a low AC, low hit point kind of artillery ranged attacker. Does it diminish the challenge that you're trying to set up by the PC? Well, I guess you always say you like having the PCs having as much knowledge as possible.
Yeah, I mean,
because I was just wondering, like, there's like a part of you that goes, I need to know more about these guys. Do recall knowledge. Do you, Bob, know anything about them? Derek, do you know anything about these guys? Like, there's something to that too. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm a little, obviously, I have a very different feeling about recall knowledge than a lot of people. Which is to say that, I think that the players should have a good baseline of understanding, without even using recall knowledge, what it is that they are up against, what it is that they are fighting. Now, granted, a lot of times through your description, you don't have to be so perfunctory. You don't have to be like, this thing is a level 4 artillery monster, right? You can describe it as being,
it doesn't wear any armor.
Yes, it's it's wearing primitive robes. And it's thin and it's frail, but its body is racked by the dark electricity that it is channeling. And then you can even say, just to be clear, just so there's no ambiguity, be like, you give this cool description. You goes, guys, these are 2 artillery monsters. Give your players a break. I mean, if your players are expert super pros and you want them to play on double hard extreme, Elden Ring, Dark Souls style, okay, you can do that. But I don't know. I like for my players to have a better idea of kind of what they're up against. Is the fun of the fight really figuring out, oh, they were artillery? No. Like, I don't think so.
No, but there is a part of it that if you feel like you discovered the secret to beating the fight, there's a little bit of that sense.
But there's a difference between the way that you discover the secret to beating the fight should rest with the players, not the PCs.
Correct. No, I get that part.
Right.
That's also, but there is something to that.
I think it's very minor. I honestly don't think it's, I guess in my experiences, there has never been a cool recall knowledge check.
I agree with that.
Recall knowledge is just a vehicle to allow us to actually play the game. It doesn't actually do anything. Doesn't do anything cool. I mean, if recall knowledge, if players knew more about the monsters and then recall knowledge let you know like that it did have an Achilles heel, right? Then that would be cool.
That's what I was thinking, like, oh, that troll doesn't regenerate with fire.
Right. Like,
you're like, oh, that's a pretty good big thing to know.
Yeah, like
we should switch up and start fireballing.
That's probably when recall knowledge is cool.
Okay.
But like knowing that creature has range attacks and has low hit points, I don't think that's cool. I don't think that's cool. Like, what the hell does that even recall knowledge mean? Oh, I know that creature's an artillery. Like, we're already talking about this being a gamist thing, right? Like, what is your character recalling? I've read about these creatures. They're artillery. Like, what does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything. So I tend to just try to, either really communicate it to my players through the style of play, or just be straight up with them. And fourth edition, the D&D, this was very easy because these creatures literally had these roles. So
the last part of the triangle, support.
Yeah, we'll go over support, and this is probably be a two-parter.
Man, there's more than this too.
Oh, way more than this. We didn't cover anything.
Oh man,
Bob, we didn't cover anything.
So much to learn.
We didn't cover anything.
All right, so we'll do support and wrap it up.
Yeah, we'll do support, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay. So, and of course, as always, if you're interested in more discussions about this, check out our Patreon, link below. It's awesome. I'm not going to plug it too hard because you should already know by now.
You should already be in it by now.
That's right. Okay, so support, you have to be very, very careful with. Okay.
Okay.
Because when I say support, what's the first thing that you think of?
Buff. I was thinking heroism or like bless.
Sure. Okay, buffing. What's the second thing you think of?
I guess I was thinking more like healing.
There you go. Okay.
Okay.
These can be absolutely horrifically devastating to your players' morale.
Yeah, you want to see a fun heal? See when Derek was doing Rise of the Rune Lords and healed a monster to full, a boss monster.
As a general rule, okay, let me explain to why these things are problematic. The problem with a buff is the way that most people think of buffs, they think of Pathfinder 2 buffs. Okay. So you're thinking of spells.
Yeah, I'm thinking of +1.
Well, no, specifically you're thinking of spells, right? Like you're thinking of heroism, right?
Correct, which gives a +1.
You're thinking of haste. You're thinking
more actions.
You're right. You're thinking of things like that nature. Here's the problem. Enlarge.
Invisibility.
Okay. Here's the problem with these. Most of these spells have a duration of a minute or 10 minutes, aka the rest of the monster's life.
Yep.
And that means that once the monster casts their spell on their ally, the monster, you're like, okay, well, I'm not going to go attack the monster because it already did the thing that it was going to do. It can't cast heroism on the other monster again, right? And then what am I going to do about it? It casts heroism on that creature. If I go and kill the caster, the support monster,
it's
still there. So the damage has been done. In other words, it kind of doesn't matter what I do. Right? Healing is kind of the same, except obviously a creature might have the ability to make multiple heals. And so you say, okay, I got to kill it. But it is extremely demoralizing for a player to have a monster be healed, especially if you use like a 2-action Pathfinder 2 style heal. Generally speaking, I almost always say avoid monsters that heal. Unless it is very...
You mean a monster casting heal, or do you mean like regeneration?
I mean heal. I mean like you play with me, right? Like
yep.
My cleric, I think, does 7d10 plus 60.
Yeah, you like roll a lot of dice
when he heals somebody, right? We should never be fighting a monster and then some other monster in it heals it for 7d10 plus 60.
Yeah.
Okay. Things like regeneration or fast healing, I think, are okay.
Okay. So when you're building a monster to regenerate itself, especially if there's a way to turn it off,
right?
That's always a really good idea.
But what we haven't, because we're getting off the point here. Okay.
I don't want to take it too far off the rails.
No. The point is the unfortunately, this is another weakness of Pathfinder 2 that I think needs to be addressed. Maybe you'll be the one to address it. If you leave a comment below, let us know what your thoughts are here. The problem is most creatures that would fall into the support category in Pathfinder 2 tend to be spellcasters. And spellcasters cast these heals. They cast these buffs. Okay. Because remember, we don't want to talk about regeneration. This is a creature that is the giving support. Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Right? If it has regeneration, that's not doing shit for anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
The class to think about that you should be trying to emulate, maybe not exactly emulate, but emulate its style, is which core class, Bob?
The Bard.
You got it. That's exactly right.
That's all I could think about.
That's exactly right. Because the Bard has these amazing abilities, these composition cantrips, which give a really cool bonus, right? Inspire Courage is a 60-foot emanation, I think, that gives the creatures +1 to hit, but it lasts 1 round. And that means that every round, the Bard has to re-pump this aura. Now we have something a lot more interesting. Because now that creature needs to be alive to keep doing that buff. But that creature in and of itself isn't actually killing your party. It's not actually, keeping you down. It's just helping its allies. So if you go and fight it, well, then you're not fighting the damage dealers. You're not fighting the other monsters that might be controlling you.
Yeah. So now you got to make choices.
But if you do kill that Bard, that buff that it's been helping out the whole group with, well, it goes away in 1 round. And the enemies won't get it anymore because it doesn't last for 1 minute or 10 minutes. It lasts 1 round. So it's the same thing with healing. Imagine a Inspire Courage ability, okay? But it was like healing 10 hit points. Or imagine a creature that had an aura and all allies within its aura gain regeneration 10.
Seems pretty strong.
Wow, all right, we got to go kill this guy. Well, what are we going to do?
That sounds awful.
Are we going to go kill this guy while the other creatures are left unimpeded and ravage apart our lines? Well, we can't just ignore this guy. Yeah, but he's not really doing it, right? Now we're getting into interesting things, right? Now we're getting into an interesting world where we're suddenly having to make decisions, and those decisions matter. And maybe there is no right or wrong answer. And maybe it'll depend on what your classes, what your ancestries are, what feats you've taken. That is really going to be the deciding factor. Now, don't get me wrong. I know what you're saying. Yes, I'm sure there are plenty of monsters, plenty of examples within the bestiary 1, 2, 3, Battle Zoo bestiary, where you have creatures that clearly fall into these abilities that have these sort of bardic-like abilities. But
how do you feel about like the rallying cries? Like those are some of my favorite, like a barbarian that almost like a terrifying howl, but like he yells and he sort of buffs all his parties. So he's not a spellcaster.
Oh yeah, no, that's my point.
Like I love those kind.
I like getting up. Don't think of just like how we said here for the control for the debuff. You don't just have to think about a spellcaster. You could think about a tentacle monster, or you could think about a brute grappling you or wrestling with you, right? Well, it's the same thing true for these support characters. Don't just think about spellcasters. I think you should think of non-magical actions. And again, there are some examples of this inside of the game. I think the ogre boss or something can use an action to yell at all of his other ogres, who then immediately can use their reaction to take a stride.
Oh, it's
right.
The one I just ran one in D&D, and I think it was an orc chief or something like that, and it gave himself advantage and the people around him advantage. Right. And I was like, oh man, that's awesome.
One of the mistakes though that is frequently made is you'll have a creature that'll have that ability, okay, but that creature will also be a super damage dealer, super tough, right, and have right. Let me give you a great example of this in Pathfinder 2. This is an example of where you could fail. This is where we'll end it. Okay. Is and again, I'm critiquing Pathfinder 2 so that we know this better. Okay, so you have a fight. And let's say you're fighting, let's say you're fighting 3 ogre gluttons. Okay. You've fought these before, Bob.
Yes.
Let me move this over here so we can see it. Okay. So you have 3 ogre gluttons. All right. These are, brutish, close the distance, attack you in melee type monsters. Okay. And then you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to add in an ogre. War Boss, I think is the name of it, what it's called. Okay. Now, we good, Bob?
It is called, I was looking it up.
Okay.
Ogre, just Ogre Boss.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Yeah, Ogre Boss. Okay.
Yep. Mhm.
And what level is the Ogre Boss? You have the
7.
Okay, 7. And I think the Gluttons are 4. Can you confirm?
The Gluttons are 4.
Okay,
Yep.
great. Okay. So, right, this might be I don't know, probably like a level 8 or something, severe encounter or something. We don't know exactly what it would be, but maybe it's
Well,
a
it
level.
depends on the party.
Yeah, it depends on the party. That is true. But here's the problem with Pathfinder 2 and other things as well. This Ogre Boss, well, it's higher level than the Ogre Gluttons. It's Pathfinder 2. It's an ogre. This guy probably hits and hits hard. Okay.
Yeah, he's
Right. So he's doing a lot of damage.
Yep.
Okay. But then he also has this war cry ability or something like that, right?
It's loading. Archives is being slow, but I can
All right.
tell you in a minute.
Don't worry about it. And even if it doesn't have this, but yeah, I mean, you can look.
Bellowing command.
That's the one. Bellowing
Ogre
command.
Boss issues a command that hastens their fellows. Each ogre ally who hears and understands this command becomes quickened until the end of the ally's next turn.
Right.
But can use an extra action only to step or stride.
There you go. So they can't strike with it, but they can step and stride with it. Right.
Mhm.
That's great. So, it hastes some bellowing command. And then I'm assuming, I think it does. Does it have attack of opportunity?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. It has attack of opportunity. Do you see the problem? This creature does good damage and it provides support and it provides battlefield control because it limits what you can do because it has attack of opportunity. This creature is just too good. This creature doesn't have any dimensionality because it just can do damn near everything. Right.
Also, that attack opportunity can also trip.
Yeah. So,
that's,
all right.
That's pretty strong.
Okay. And so the problem,
Which I think has reach.
Okay.
It's an ogre.
Oh, yeah.
Hook.
Yeah. Well, I think the ogre hook is done, but it's a large creature, so he has reach. Okay.
Yeah.
So the problem with this creature is that it does all 3 things. And obviously that makes it a very tough foe, but it also makes the party go, what is this? How am I supposed to engage with this monster? Because it does everything. And then it becomes really easy because you're like, well, obviously this is the thing we need to kill because it's the support and the control and the damage. But then the battle, monsters like this make the battle less interesting.
Because there is no decision.
There's no decision. This thing
is made for you.
This thing is just the ultimate Uber thing, right? And there's no, shades of gray. It's much more interesting when the creature that is yelling out, bellowing commands or, inspiring courage or something like that is a creature that is doing something else in the battlefield. It's not doing damage. It's not locking the creatures down, right? It's way more interesting in that regard because then you get to make these cool decisions. When a creature can do all 3 of these things at once, also, as a GM, you're like, what the hell is this monster? Like, what am I supposed to do with this creature? Should it be striding and smashing people with its hook, or should he be bellowing every turn? Yes, I guess you could make that decision.
Everything, because they're only one action.
Right? Well, no, but that's my point. Should it stride, strike, or should it stride, strike, bellow? And you're like, yeah, I mean, that's cool. We could think about that. And as a player character with your PC, that might be a really interesting decision. But like, look, you might have just opened this up today, right now. And the combat encounter is starting right now. And we're having this conversation. We're already having a lot more time to think about it than you normally would during a session. And that's the real reality of the situation is, right? You don't get the kind of time that you would want to normally have to create these things. So I find creatures like this to be almost, as opposed to being,
do we ever fight an ogre boss? I don't think so.
I think so for sure. You had to have.
We did?
Yeah.
I don't remember because if this would have been a bitch.
Yeah. And generally speaking as well, I am kind of against creatures having, and it's unfortunate. I mean, this is just kind of a problem in general with Pathfinder 2, but like, I don't like the idea of having creatures having high damage and having attack of opportunity.
Interesting. A lot of boss stuff has those.
Yes. And I don't like it. I think that those should be different things. Unfortunately, for the attack of opportunity to be effective, you have to have high damage. Does that make
I
sense?
wonder if, yeah, I mean, if not, your attack opportunity weekly,
Yeah, you're
unless
like,
you were doing something fancy with the attack opportunity, like
well,
tripping
well,
or
no, but
doing
that
stuff.
then technically it's not an attack of opportunity, right? Now that doesn't mean that you can't have a cool reaction. Okay,
Mhm.
like I'll give you a great example
So when would you use attack of opportunity then?
for
It,
for creatures that. Okay, like let me give an example. Attack of opportunity should be for a creature that is what I would call sticky,
it's
right?
trying to stay in combat.
It wants you to fight it so that its allies can go do their thing. It's not there to do damage. It's not there to buff its allies. It's there to keep your heavy hitters occupado,
Yeah. So you're
right?
using attack opportunity for that, but reactions can be used for bosses to do cool things.
Well, I mean, bosses is sort of a lukewarm term because
I'm
in Pathfinder 2, a creature that's a boss might just be it's just a regular creature a couple levels later.
Yep.
So, you have this, you know,
100% actually this exact case.
right. So, you can't say that a creature is a boss in Pathfinder 2 because there is no template for solo or boss.
I disagree. This one's called Ogre Boss.
Okay, well, all right. You do got me there.
But at level like 13
Right.
or maybe even 12, I'd be killing this thing with like one blow with it, with my former barbarian.
Correct. So, long story short, one thing that I think needs to happen, and maybe the knights are the people to do it, is I do think that it helps for just not only for understanding it quickly what a monster's role is, but I do think that having creatures having a role in combat is very valuable and it's important, not just for the GM, but for the players as well. And if you're not familiar with them, in Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition, the roles were you had artillery monsters. Okay.
I also like the names of these things.
Okay. And this is not exactly this is not exactly accurate, but we'll have damage. All right. We will have AC. We'll have hit points, and we'll have what I'm going to call mobility. Okay. So an artillery had high damage, low AC, low hit points, and we'll say moderate mobility. Okay.
And we had, I think, let's see if I can remember some of these. Brute.
Yeah. So brute.
Okay. Yeah.
All right,
Brute.
so let's go down. What do we think of the brute has?
That's probably got high damage.
Yep.
High hit points for sure. I don't know about AC. That one, medium, maybe?
Low and low.
Low AC? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Interesting.
Right. It's a big lumbering brute.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It does a lot of damage, but it's slow. It's easy to hit. It's, those type of things, but it has a lot of hit points. All right. Next. Now, we'll start with the damage dealers from 4 East perspective.
This 4E, yeah.
Lurker.
I think these are the only 3 that I remember besides Minion. The rest of them I get confused about.
Yep. Well, Minion was a subtype. So,
okay.
So something like a Lurker, okay, is going to have medium to high damage. All right. Its AC is probably going to be medium.
Okay.
Its hit points are going to be low to medium, but its mobility is going to be high.
Think like rogue.
Think rogue, but think of it in terms of like striking in, striking out. Right. This is where I use the term mobility, but this is where like maybe this creature can hide. Maybe this creature can cast darkness. Maybe this creature could turn invisible. Right. When you think about this creature, think about a creature that if you're flat-footed, you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So yeah, I guess rogue would be
a rogue. Yeah.
Right?
That's how I always thought the lurker.
Okay. So these are kind of like your primary damage dealers. Right. Then you have what I consider to be the sort of the middle of the road. The skirmisher.
Okay.
Right. Medium damage, medium AC, medium hit points, and actually kind of high mobility. Now the skirmisher mobility is different. The skirmisher's mobility is more like speed, right? Or flight. The danger of the skirmisher is their ability to move quickly. If you're a barbarian or a fighter or a champion, a creature coming at you with medium AC, medium hit points, medium damage may not be that much of a threat. But if you're a low hit point character class and this creature is fast enough or can fly or has all sorts of teleportation abilities and it can quickly move around the battlefield, right? you might spend a couple of turns getting in melee with it, and then it's able to, in 2 actions, be on the other side of the battlefield and
Mhm.
and engaging with your, you know, your sorcerer, your wizard. In a typical D&D party, you might think of this as something like the monk,
Mhm.
right?
That's a good example.
Yeah. So that's sort of your middle of the road. And then you get to the last 2, which are sort of more of your support and controlling type creatures. You have the controller and you have the soldier.
I thought there was, yeah, I thought it was like a soldier or a warrior.
Right. And the controller is someone who is it's a creature or a spellcaster that is using abilities to, actually debuff the ally, enemies, slow them, immobilize them, frighten them, sicken them, right? They are controlling the PC's actions. You could think of these as people who inflict conditions,
Mhm.
right? The soldier is kind of like a fighter or a champion, right? They make your life difficult. They're not going to do a lot of damage, right? Their
So
damage,
they're high AC, high HP.
right? In fact, you almost don't want to attack them,
Interesting.
right? Because you're like, this thing isn't even a threat, right? Think about Knights of Last Call.
They're just getting in the way.
Think about Rise. Think about Rise of the Rune Lords, right?
Nick,
Think about Nick.
Escanor.
Think about Escanor, our champion, right? He didn't do any damage, right? But you never wanted to attack him.
Correct.
But at the same time, if you didn't attack him, right, and he was, absorbing damage from you with his champion's reaction, or if attack of opportunity, you're like, I can't just ignore this guy completely because he will make me ineffective. What if we had built that, we were going to retrain, but before that, like, he was grabbing people.
Oh yeah, that'd have been awesome.
And now suddenly you're grabbed by the champion in full plate, and you're like, okay, great. Well, I guess I attacked the champion, and you're like, okay, like this, I'm winning. I'm winning right now. You're attacking me, right? And so the soldier is a kind of a frustrating thing because you don't want to fight, but at the same time, if the soldier has nobody to protect, he's never going to kill you, right? He just doesn't he just doesn't have the damage. He doesn't have the ability to deal with it. And the same thing true with our sort of with our controller. Their damage can be sort of low to medium because a fireball can do some damage, but it's not like the type of damage that a brute or an artillery is doing. But they have these sort of lower ACs and these low to medium hit points, and their mobility is probably also pretty average. But their danger is their ability to affect you possibly at range, possibly AOE, and they can really bring you down. And then the sort of the last type is leader. And this is that bard type. Again,
oh, okay.
Right? The damage might be medium, the AC might be medium, the hit points might be medium, even the mobility might be medium. So in a sense, they kind of look a lot like the skirmisher.
But they do something totally different.
But they do something totally different. Their thing is helping out and buffing and helping out everybody else in their group. And again, you're like, well, do I go and fight the leader? But the leader isn't what's killing me, but the leader is also what's enabling them to kill me. And so it creates this really interesting, sort of challenge. And those are sort of your archetypes of 4th edition. And that's kind of a lost art that I think, even though those things don't exactly exist in Pathfinder 2, although, again, if you look in the GMG and you look under this concept of like a monster role, you will see, let me take a look here. Actually, let me bring it up here. If you go to Pathfinder pf2.tools, okay, and you take a look at the monster tool, you will see in the upper left-hand corner, when you go to, and I'll put a screenshot of this on here, but when you go to, create a new monster, one of the options that you can choose from is called the base roadmap. Okay. And the base roadmaps, which Pathfinder 2 provides, are for a brute, a magical striker, a skirmisher, a sniper, a soldier, a spells caster, and a skill paragon. Skill paragon doesn't really have as much practical benefit in a combat encounter, but the brute, the magical striker, the skirmisher, the sniper, the soldier, the spellcaster kind of roughly align with 4th edition roles. So that DNA is there.
One's called complete nonsense.
Yeah, that literally just randomly generates the things. But the important thing to take away from this is what these do is set the baseline armor class, fortitude, hit points, damage, attack roll. they set the stats, but what they don't set are the abilities. And the
Hmm.
abilities are what really allow these roles to make a difference. If you have a creature which is a big, heavy brute and has a high damage and low speed, low armor class, high hit points, but then you give it an ability to heal, it's going to feel really dissonant, right? Give that brute, an ability that makes it feel like a brute, that
Yeah,
makes it,
absolutely.
that's knocking you to the crushing you and ripping you apart and, tearing you apart with damage, and make sure that the party understands, hey, that's what this creature does. This creature
I don't know.
messes.
Did you talk about that? It also tells you what the brute is after you click it. So after you click on the tools thing below, it tells you brute, high or extreme strength, high to moderate constitution.
Correct. Well, that's
low.
what I'm talking
But
about, right?
well, what's nice is it tells you that too.
Yeah, exactly. It gives you
Low
these,
perception.
right. It's giving you the baseline for the stats, but it doesn't tell you the other things, right? Because when you think about, if I was going to add a couple of abilities to a brute, right, they should be abilities that feel brutish, that should be high damage compelling.
That's what's lacking from this.
And that's what's like, and that's what the art of monster design in Pathfinder 2 is all about.
But a different topic,
which is a completely different topic. Correct. So, I'll put a link here. So, I'll put a link in the notes, but also, we'll have a screenshot here. But long story short, when you are designing an encounter for Pathfinder 2, a combat encounter, I should say, you want to make sure that you are thinking about I have my eraser on here. What are the foes? What is the terrain or the environment? And what are the objectives? And if you can vary these from fight to fight or within a fight, you are going to create more fun and memorable combats that are going to allow you to challenge the PCs and the players, and ultimately leave you with something that is going to be fun and memorable both tonight and for years to come. And that's really kind of what you want from a good combat encounter. And that, not saying that every fight needs to be something that it gets remembered for 25 years, but I'm willing to bet that if you had the fight with the zombies that were flinging characters into the pool of acid, if you had the fight with the Kuatoa whips crackling lightning bolts down the lines, and then the big tentacle monster came out and grabbed the one guy, and he was, wailing around in the sky, getting whipped around, chances are better that you are going to go, I remember that fight. I may not remember the campaign, I may not remember the characters, but I'll remember that moment, and I'll remember who who I overcame that challenge with, and it'll form these sort of bonds of fellowship and brotherhood and sisterhood that I don't think you can get from any other type of gaming experience, except for maybe some of those WoW raids where people get really, really attached to their guildmates, because it does feel like you went through something and it was challenging, because those type of fights don't just challenge the PCs, they challenge the player. And that means that you are going to feel personally invested in that combat, that you and your actions really did make a difference. So that's where we're at, Bob.
Yeah. So stay tuned to part 2 of this, and then we can assign homework on after part 2.
That's correct. So for part 2, we're going to get into some of the terrain and environment component. We're going to talk a little bit about the objective component as well. And then we'll have some homework for Bob and for you, about basically designing a better combat encounter. You might already have some gears spinning, in which case, good on you. Yeah. So quickly here at the end, before we wrap up, we, the Knights of Last Call, are live every other Tuesday. Actually, we're live every Tuesday, but we're starting up a brand new AP, which may be going on by the time you watch this. But check us out Tuesdays on our YouTube channel, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we'll be doing some sort of actual play. Could be Pathfinder 2, could be a different game, maybe Dungeon World or Blades in the Dark. And of course, we also have a live stream on Thursdays where we cover a variety of different topics. We have a bunch of videos that get released every time, and we have a killer Patreon where you can join up for ton of behind the scenes content, bonus footage, access to our award-winning, it's not award-winning, but our legendary Discord, and have a lot of fun with that. So check that out below if you're interested in that.
Absolutely.
Bob, any final thoughts?
No, I like this because I think it expanded. All I could think about during this was how to tweak some of my games that I was running. Some of my encounters, I think, were a little boring.
Yep.
I don't think they're very memorable,
Nope.
especially there are some that I don't need to be memorable, but there are some that I feel like could have been more memorable if I would have added a little bit more to it.
Yep.
And that's what I'm looking at, just this part one of this, and saying, okay, how would I have changed some of the, like, I ran some spider fights. How would I have changed that? And I did do some terrain and hazards, but I think I fell a little flat on the objectives. And that's
Okay.
kind of where I want to I think focus on building myself as a GM and building my encounters
And that's what
and
we're
my
here.
combat encounters.
And that is what we are here to do. So, on behalf of Bob and myself, I want to say thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Knights of Last Call.